Good evening. Welcome tonight. My name is Connie Leeper, and I am the organizing director for NC Warren. We are a 29-year-old climate justice nonprofit based in Durham. We're member-supported, and at this time, I would really like to thank our members and volunteers who are with us tonight. You need to know that we cannot do the work to slow climate change without you, without your support. That support is both financial and in kind. And thank you for all the ways that you volunteer and inspire us. For the past 15 years, our top priority has been climate justice and the increasingly urgent need to shift this state to clean, renewable energy. Tonight, we're discussing a big step in that direction. Our new Clean Paths 2025 report is a strategy for achieving an economical, clean energy transition by quickly replacing fossil fuels with local solar power and battery storage. This plan will also save tens of thousands of dollars, tens of billions of dollars, create thousands of jobs, and help all customers. The Clean Path The Clean Path 2025, that from now on I'll just say CP25, as we call it, is quite doable. And it must be done in order for North Carolinians to do our part to help slow climate change and to help slow the climate crisis. We have a particular duty because one of the larger climate polluters in the world is based right here in our own backyard, Duke Energy. Duke leaders plan to keep building power plants that burn fracked natural gas and pipelines that emit methane, a climate pollutant that is 100 times more potent than carbon dioxide, and Duke Energy is limiting the growth of renewables. Scientists say expanding the burning of natural gas is disastrous for the climate and is wrong for our health and is wrong for our economy. CP25 can lead us to a cleaner future while growing our economy and helping to avert worse effects of climate change. And together, we are going to make that happen. For the first hour tonight, we hear an overview of CP25 by the author, Bill Powers, how it differs from Duke Energy's long-range plans, and how it will enable us to transform our energy economy. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Powers. Mr. Powers has over 30 years' experience in energy and environmental engineering. In addition to the San Diego Clean Energy Plan, he wrote Bay Area Smart Energy 2020, the 2012 Strategic Energy Plan for the San Francisco Bay region to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from power consumption by 60% by 2020. Mr. Powers also has a strong Tar Heel pedigree, having earned a BS in mechanical engineering from Duke University and a master's in environmental sciences from UNC, Chapel Hill. He has consulted with NC Warren for 2 years and is dedicated, very, very dedicated, to helping us build a clean energy future. We really appreciate Bill Powers, who we think is a brilliant engineer, and he's also great to work with. Come on up, Bill.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. It is inspiring for me as a speaker when I have a hall full of people who have come out to hear what I have to say, so I appreciate that very much. And first off, I would like to thank NC Warren for having the foresight to develop an alternative plan, clean energy plan, cost-effective plan that presents a positive vision of the future and provides a pretty dramatic contrast to the business as usual plan that's been put out there by Duke Energy. And just as a starting question, how many of you were at the Hayti Heritage Center preview back in May? Okay, for those of you who were there, this will be an expansion of what you saw in May. At that time, the plan had not been fully developed, and so you'll see a few things that you have seen before. But this will be your 101, a basic 101 on how to move smartly into the future. So a quick overview. Clean, local, cost-effective, reliable model based on solar energy and batteries as the backbone. Solar in homes, businesses, parking lots, vacant urban land, target of 25% of homes and commercial buildings with solar by 2025 and rising to 50% by 2030. The objective is to displace coal power and gas-fired power as quickly as possible. Net elimination of coal and gas plants targeted by 2030, net meaning we're going to need some of that gas power to deal with weather issues and other emergency conditions, but the net effect will be 100% clean energy. And also the objective is that all customers benefit financially, no cross subsidies, pays for itself, and stable rates into the future. How will it be paid for so that all economic strata in society can afford it? A couple of mechanisms. One is on-bill financing, where the reduction that you achieve by doing those solar, battery, and energy efficiency measures reduces your bill so that that increment can be put back into it without you having to front a substantial amount of money to make it happen. And a program that is available in many states, and at least the framework is available in this state but has not yet been launched, is what's called a property assessed clean energy program, which I'll talk about a bit more later on, where the money that's needed to make this happen is not put up front, but is spread over numerous years on your property tax bill. So what is the competition doing? Duke's plan makes this plan, it's actually a perfect framework to roll out such a plan, because when the utility is proposing such a vast investment in conventional infrastructure, it makes it relatively straightforward to show an economic benefit for doing something completely different that is focused at the point of use. Duke's proposing in North Carolina $13 billion in transmission and distribution upgrades, some of them interesting, like doubling up on transmission lines to back up vulnerable communities as opposed to going in a different direction. New gas plants, $6 billion of investment. New pipelines, Duke Energy's portion of that, $2.5 billion. And in their long-range plan, do the minimum amount of renewable energy necessary to meet the legal requirement and stop. Most customers, not just in North Carolina, but across the country, would love to have solar power if they could do it economically, not natural gas. One of the issues that I have to commend NC Warren on has been their lead role in underscoring that gas-fired power production is not just burning gas at the power plant. It also involves methane leakage upstream such that there is sufficient methane leakage, and methane is such a potent greenhouse gas that we get no net benefit from burning gas in combined cycle or combustion turbine power plants that is shale gas compared to a conventional coal plant. That shale gas, fracking gas, combustion is not the answer to addressing climate change. This happens to be a photograph of a well in Pennsylvania, a frack gas well that would provide gas to the region. One very good part of North Carolina's current situation is it is the #2 solar state in the country after California. And for the record, I'm based in San Diego, so I'll make a number of comments about what's going on in California tonight. But the reason for North Carolina's #2 in the nation status has a lot to do with federal law and how North Carolina in the past has progressively interpreted that law to make the payments to independent power producers, in this case solar providers, sufficient for them to make money independent of the utility. And only very recently has Duke exerted its power to try and curb that rapid development of North Carolina larger scale power as we saw, solar power as we saw in that graphic. The local solar resource strength in North Carolina is excellent. There is about 130 million megawatt hours of potential on rooftops, parking lots, urban vacant land. It's about double what's necessary for solar power to displace gas and coal-fired power in the state. It is proportionally distributed around the state, small towns, larger towns, cities. And the new jobs that are necessary to do a build-out of this type would be dispersed across the state as well. The financial viability of this has really been driven by the spectacular drop in solar prices over the last 6 years or so. These graphics are recent. Oops. These graphics show, this is 2010 to 2017, the average decline across the nation in the price of residential PV, $7 to under $3. Average decline in commercial solar, 536, 185, about a one-third the cost today as it was just 6 or 7 years ago. And it just so happens that at this point, even in states like North Carolina that have low utility rates relative to many other parts of the country, it is now as cost-effective or more cost-effective to go solar than to stick with the grid power. And that happened essentially this year. And so that's one story that needs to be shouted from the rooftops, really, because I think in this state there has been a fair amount of large-scale solar developed in eastern North Carolina, very little rooftop parking lot solar, but it's now economically quite viable to do that at a large scale. This shows a range of costs with current prices. This is residential solar installed cost was seen in the last slide. What is the cost of production, residential? And this range really depends on, do you front the money yourself, all of it? That would be the low end. Or do you finance it all 100%? That's the high end. Range, 8 cents to 11 cents a kilowatt hour. Average utility price, 12 cents. Commercial, range, 4 cents to 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Average utility price, 9 cents a kilowatt hour. So the economics are favorable to going solar. Law was passed last summer in North Carolina that was intended to, I think, get the reins a bit on these flourishing programs like the larger scale utility solar in eastern North Carolina, and now the fact that rooftop solar is an economic positive in the state. And one of the requirements is that the utilities evaluate what's the value of solar. And I think the underlying intent is to indicate the value is lower than it's currently in this environment where you just offset grid power with the solar on your home. It's called net metering. You're offsetting a retail price. It's called value of solar, and it's interesting they use that term in the legislation, value of solar, because about 10 states around the nation have done these types of studies. How much is it worth? In addition to just the value of the energy that's produced, the capacity of that solar that's coming out at the right time in a summer afternoon and backing off how much the grid and the utility has to provide, the reduced transmission capacity because you're producing it right there and using it right there as opposed to generating it far from Durham or Chapel Hill and then moving it in over transmission and distribution. RPS, renewable energy compliance benefits, that when these studies have been done, they generally show it's even more valuable than simply offsetting grid power. And that's something that the communities and municipalities and others can advocate for. There are many studies that show it's even more valuable than what people are getting paid for it And that should be the end result of this evaluation. A core element of this proposal, NC Clean Path 2025, is that individual residences, homes, commercial buildings become semi-autonomous power plants, that they are capable of auto-providing most of their power and exporting and importing as needed. And this becomes cost-effective for homes when that battery is fully utilized today. And I have the advantage today, as opposed to earlier studies of this type that I've done, is there are now utilities that are bundling thousands of home batteries together and dispatching them just like peaking turbines, and also dispatching them to maintain the frequency just where it should be on the grid, and all these other little things that have to be done to provide high-quality power. Commercial buildings are even more cost-effective now by simply the way they are charged for power is during the day, during work days, they call peak times, they get charged a lot more than they would at nighttime. They charge different rates at different times of the day. Commercial buildings today can drop their costs by including batteries and just shifting those loads so that they're drawing power from the grid when power is cheap, and they're discharging from their batteries when power is expensive. And that's cost effective now. I mentioned a program, that there are now utility programs that I can point to and say this is not just a dream. This is a reality at an initial step scale that can be expanded very quickly to a massive scale. This happens to be a project by an investor-owned utility up in Vermont, Green Mountain Power, where they're in the process, they're about halfway through the deployment of putting Tesla Powerwall batteries into 2,000 homes, coupled with solar, and using these aggregated batteries as a peaking power plant, frequency modulation. And they are offering their customers two options. You can either pay $15 a month over a 10-year period to essentially lease the batteries, or you can put down an upfront cost of $1,500 and buy the battery. Well, if you were to do that as a one-off transaction for your home with no connection to a project like this, you'd pay $7,000 to $10,000 for that battery. And that would make the economics more difficult to justify, because you may use it as a backup or not fully take advantage of its capabilities. But at this relatively low cost, paying, say, $1,500 for a battery of this type, the overall cost of electricity from your home system hardly changes than without the battery. You're putting in a $15,000 solar system, and you add another $1,500 for the battery. It makes relatively little difference in the final cost per kilowatt hour. But it's a revolutionary difference in what your home can do and how much it can back you up, especially during times of trouble. Ice storms that knock down distribution lines, hurricanes that move through and knock down distribution lines. You're backed up. You don't even necessarily note that there are any problems on the grid because you're backed up where you're using the electricity. Now, it's not just up in this room, those of us that are in this room that see the potential for this. And there was an interesting article just a couple of weeks ago in the trade press where they were quoting a Duke executive at a conference talking about this exact type of future. There's going to be a lot of excitement around batteries in the next 5 years. Well, in here, there's a lot of excitement today, but over the next 5 years on a broader scale. I would say that the country will get blanketed with projects. It's a big opportunity for all of us to deliver what customers want. Now, that's a true statement, the last point. And so this is, they're aware of what's going on. I mean, what's happening now in this state and other states around the country is a power struggle behind the curtain. Who will own this future? Will it be you, or will it be the utility that owns and operates these systems? And that's where the community has to push back. It should not be the utility. It should be these are inherently autonomous, independent systems that can be bundled. I have an off-grid system in California, in San Diego, that I did as kind of an experiment station because I felt that even 3 years ago when I put it in, that putting together a retail system should be reasonably cost effective in my own area where our utility rates are significantly higher, not only for the house, but also for an electric vehicle. And at that time I did it because they were offering cheap leases on electric vehicles, which they had not done before. So I could say, hey, this is an everyman system. I'm paying $199 a month for a lease instead of $500 or some much higher price. At the time, I could not get lithium batteries with any guarantee to put in my home system. They were not available. And that was only 3 years ago. This is a list of what commercial lithium 10-year guarantee batteries are available today. And it's 10 companies long. And they're deploying these types of systems. And what it means is, on a macro level, this is seen as a huge growth industry in the coming years, which it will be. And now there's a tremendous amount of competition. And if this had been available 3 years ago at these prices, I could have put in a state-of-the-art system like this, cost me less than the sealed lead acid system that I ended up putting in. And so this is just, with this kind of competition, battery prices are going to continue to drop, drop, drop. This is a graphic of, this is 2012. I mean, you can almost reach back and touch 2012. That was not long ago. And the battery costs for state-of-the-art lithium home battery systems have been dropping like a stone. $800 a kilowatt hour in 2012, $200 approximately in 2017. And that's really what's revolutionizing this potential opportunity. So the NC Clean Path 2025, a primary target is to get 25% of North Carolina homes and buildings to achieve zero net energy with solar and efficiency by 2025. That's about 1 million homes in the state out of about 5 million, or 4.5, 5 million, 4 million. And that the standard installation would include batteries, that would be a standard part of the package for the reasons that I've mentioned, both backup power in times of trouble and also to displace a major part of Duke's build-out, which is building more combustion turbines to serve exactly this purpose. Problem with the turbines, besides burning shale gas, is they're a one-trick pony. They can't absorb solar power. They are limited to being useful when they're online, but the backup turbines are generally not online. They may operate 1-2% of the time during the year. And then by achieve a 50% reduction in greenhouse gases from North Carolina generation by 2025 compared to 2015, and build this program on programs that already exist, both in this state and other states. Net metering exists. What has stalled net metering in North Carolina has been unfavorable prices, which have now flipped and become favorable this year and will get more favorable as each year goes forward. Wholesale power development or utility scale that has been so successful in primarily eastern North Carolina, but to continue to encourage that development, but encourage it to be closer to where it's used. Because if you're building thousands of megawatts in remote areas of eastern North Carolina, relatively soon you end up with a bottleneck on your transmission system, and you need to spend billions of dollars upgrading that transmission system to move that power to Raleigh, Durham, Greensboro, Charlotte. But if you put those larger scale systems close to those cities, then you do not create bottlenecks and you do not need to spend money on that. The solar installation rate in 2016 in North Carolina was about 1,000 megawatts, which was almost exclusively large scale in the east. And the objective of this program is to scale that up rapidly to 3,000 megawatts a year, continue with 1,000 megawatts a year of large-scale solar. That system's up and running, it works, and expand to adding 2,000 megawatts per year of rooftop and parking lot solar. A state in the country as an example of expanding net metering without really even focusing on it is my state, California, where we did install more than 1,000 megawatts of rooftop in the last couple of years without incentives, without additional programs. Simply having the program available when you can demonstrate clearly that it's a better deal than grid power is sufficient to get that market to really move. Again, I mentioned that the target was to get to 25% of existing homes, residences by 2025, zero net energy, meaning they, at least over the course of the year, are producing as much solar power as is used by that residence, and that it is expanded to 2 million homes by 2030. Homes and businesses in Carolina, which in this graphic are residential and commercial, this is comparing how much electricity is consumed by residential, commercial, and industrial. About 80% of the electricity in North Carolina is consumed from residential and commercial, so that if you are targeting that market, you are targeting the bulk of electricity demand in the state. Excuse me for just one moment. The utilities around the country, Duke Energy, of course, but also utilities in the West, in the Midwest, Northeast, have for years targeted, so here we have the home, here we have the business, and here we should go through this. Big power plant, transmission lines providing high voltage power, say 230 volts, sub-transmission, and then distribution in the city and town. And this is where the electricity at relatively low voltage, say 12 kilovolts, is distributed to businesses. And for years, the utility industry around the country has been saying, this was not built for power to come off solar panels and move that way. All hell's going to break loose if we try and do that. And so they did make it a major issue to evaluate. And one thing that the Department of Energy has been doing well for the last few years is promoting low-cost solar and studies that look at bottlenecks to doing this type of project on a grand scale. And so they conducted numerous multi-million-dollar studies with Dominion, Virginia, Dominion, North Carolina, utilities in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area, one to a lesser degree that was done by Duke Energy itself, numerous evaluations around the country to quantify this. So how much money is it going to take for us to run large amounts of distributed solar backwards on this system up and out? And what they found ultimately was that for relatively little expense, you could run tremendous amounts of solar power back up this line or these lines. And that was somewhat of a revelation because that has been a showstopper for a number of years. And the fact that we now know that for relatively little expense, in the case of North Carolina, on the order of hundreds of millions of dollars as a one-time expense for a grid where $1 billion a year is just spent on operations and maintenance, and we're comparing a current build-out program of $13 billion over 10 years, it puts in context that for a relatively little investment, there really is no bottleneck to moving as much solar power as is needed to back out coal and gas power in North Carolina. And that has been relatively recent information. These studies were completed in 2015, 2016, and have really put a lot of momentum behind the practicality of a project and a plan of this type. Now, I have noticed, I've been living in San Diego for a long time. This is not a problem in San Diego, but there are a lot of trees in North Carolina. And a lot of people live under trees. How many people live under trees? Look at that. I think we're going to have to put this plant in the freezer. Everybody's living under a tree, and it's a solar plant. And so there is a solution to that, which is community solar projects, where the utility or the community, the municipality, builds an array on a vacant land, 1,000 panels. Well, you need 20 panels or 15 panels to cover your annual use of electricity. You buy into that community project. And that way you do cover yourself through solar that's generated locally. It just doesn't happen to be on your roof or your parking lot or carport. This just happens to be a Brunswick Electric Membership Corporation down on the coast. I'm using them as an example. They have put in a few of these community projects. These are a couple of examples. And they market to their customers that if you're a renter, apartment dweller, family housing, shading issues, this is your project. Come talk to us and arrange for your portion of that project. I just mentioned on this issue of the existing distribution grid being able to handle a tremendous amount of distributed solar power that makes it more feasible or makes it really practical to run solar generated at 1 million different points as a backbone power supply for a grid, a statewide grid of this type. These studies that I was mentioning by DOE had some limitations in them, didn't evaluate closely, well, what if most or all of these homes and businesses had batteries in them as well? How would that impact the cost? A study of that type was completed within the last 3 weeks in California and determined that there would be essentially no grid upgrade costs if the homes and businesses were equipped with batteries. And these earlier studies that I was talking about were looking at homes and businesses that did not have batteries and were moving solar onto the grid. So that's yet more good news from, in this case, a utility commission study in an area that's got to deal with tremendous amounts of solar now. So ultimately, this gets down to the financial feasibility of this plan compared to the status quo plan. And the objective of North Carolina Clean Path 2025 is to do all of this at a lower cost than status quo power supply. And that means that the rate, the net cost to the consumer of their auto supply and their utility costs over time are less than what they're paying the utility at this time. It could also be municipal or electric co-op. I'm using Duke because it's Duke numbers that are in this slide. Energy efficiency, Duke is in the bottom half or North Carolina in the bottom half of states around the country in terms of how much is spent on energy efficiency measures. And energy efficiency measures remain the best bang for the buck for reducing emissions of greenhouse gases and how much you have to spend on electricity. The plan would increase the amount of annual expense on energy efficiency to get the state up in the top tier of states that are spending on energy efficiency, to reduce how much has to be made up with solar and batteries. Smart meters have been deployed throughout the state. When you see equivalent numbers, it just means that that's part of their plan, it's part of this plan. Where do smart meters come in particularly handy? They come in particularly handy in identifying very high users. Who's got the 1985 air conditioner that barely works, pulls huge amounts of power, and is driving up demand at peak? You want to find those first, and you want to replace those first with high efficiency units and get the best bang for the buck. Your target isn't finding someone who's got an extremely high efficiency unit and have them replace it with something slightly better. It's to find the worst units, get them out, show a lot of cost benefit early. And you can do that with a smart meter because you can monitor where that power is coming in real time. Grid maintenance. This plan relies on the existing transmission and distribution grid to continue to function reliably. You can't move solar power from a home to another home without a distribution grid. You can't move it out of Durham to Raleigh without a transmission grid. And so it does rely on this being maintained and an integral part of the system. Grid upgrades. We just talked about how much it would cost to upgrade the distribution system to allow very large inflows of solar power. And there may be some cost to that, depending on the degree to which batteries are incorporated. More batteries, less grid upgrade costs. but it pales in comparison to what Duke is proposing to spend over the next 10 years on transmission upgrades. And an example I started to mention earlier was one that they used specifically is vulnerable communities. Vulnerable communities where their proposal is we'll double up on a second transmission line. Well, if your problem is ice building up on transmission lines in winter and then wind blowing them down, or storms knocking down distribution lines, building a second distribution line near the first one may not be the best solution, though it will cost a lot of money to do it. Some of the assets that are available in North Carolina would continue to be used, or North and South Carolina. Pump storage can continue to be used to absorb solar power and discharge it. The nuclear plants, the existing ones, would continue to operate until their licenses expire. Coal plants would be retired as soon as possible. Gas plants would drop back into backup power systems. Direct new jobs, even though rates to customers would drop, the investment would be much greater in this plan. And that means the amount of jobs created would be substantially greater than the jobs that would be created under Duke's more status quo plan. I'm going to start moving a lot more quickly because I just got the 5-minute mark. So this is available for you to read at any time. This is my house, and I just pointed out for one reason. In the upper right is the electric vehicle. This system is designed to feed the house and the electric vehicle. And you learn pretty quickly how to work it so that it works reliably and efficiently, and you accommodate the weather. We can talk about that at any time as well. Parking lot solar. Battery systems can be scaled up to virtually any size. We had an issue with the blowout of a gas well in Los Angeles a couple years ago. One response, a good one in California, was deploy 100 megawatts of batteries, almost like that. And it has really shown how fast you can ramp up on batteries when the politics line up with that target. We've discussed that. This is a profile of solar production in North Carolina over the course of a year. A minimum in 1 is January, 6 is June, 12 is December. It's important to note that solar production drops off in winter, but not spectacularly. It's about 60% in January and December what it is in June. You still get substantial solar production. The blue line above that solar production in this slide is the demand curve for Duke Energy Carolinas. And you see it's got tails in winter. Otherwise, it's, in a way, tracking natural solar production. Those tails are electric heaters, baseboard heaters, and electric heat pumps. This is showing the same graphic, but showing that that red line is what's the base load. Base load in winter without that heating demand is relatively low compared to the summer load. If we could address that use of electricity for heating, we could match North Carolina's load much better to the natural output of the sun. And we'll move on through that. So a major focus of this plan is reducing that electric heater load in winter, and also reducing summer air conditioning loads at peak, done with much more aggressive demand response. Demand response is cycling air conditioners such that they're not all on at the same time while still providing comfort. A lot of electric water heaters, shift those loads so that they're not coming on at 8 a.m. in a winter morning. You don't need them to be on then. That's when people are taking showers, but there's plenty of hot water generally at the time. Shift that load to noon. Drop that peak load so that Duke can't use it as an excuse to build more gas turbines. And focus on getting the high use, inefficient devices off the system as soon as possible. The way to do this, and by the way, all of this is based on existing North Carolina programs or utility programs in the state. Usually these programs are good programs, but they're voluntary and they're boutique. 1% of the customers are in, 2% of the customers. The only way for them to be really effective tools is that everybody's in who can participate. Always allow those that for some reason can't participate not to do so. But those are called opt-out programs. Everybody's in, you can opt out. You do it that way, you can increase, for example, the demand response potential of the state by a factor of 10. And it needs to be done for NC Clean Path 2025 to be fully realized. Example of a mini split unit, which very high efficient heating and cooling device. Example of energy efficiency reduction, 20%, and the fact that one example is 10 years ago, LEDs were exotics. They were subsidized. Now, they're routine. They need no subsidy. Everyone's buying LEDs because that's the current bulb. That has reduced lighting loads by 80%. It's those types of natural developments that are driving loads to be either static or declining across the country. Financing, we talked about that a little earlier. On-bill financing, property assessed clean energy. I think we'll cover that in more detail in the Q&A, so I think I'll move on from that. We've covered the fact that Duke is planning to spend tens of billions of dollars on conventional infrastructure that simply won't be needed with a plan that is based on a solar battery backbone. Public utilities have been out in front in leading this type of transition to solar. We'll talk a little bit about that at the Q&A. Some isolated utilities like Kauai Electric have done spectacular work with PV and batteries over the last couple of years and are rapidly, that is becoming a backbone, so we have that type of example. And we earlier talked about Green Mountain Power as a laboratory for aggregating residential batteries into a single virtual power plant. The interesting thing about this power plant is it's unmanned and automatic. It doesn't require operator intervention. And last slide, which is the CEO of Green Mountain Power, and I'm pushing Green Mountain Power quite hard here, and part of it is they're an investor-owned utility. Duke is an investor-owned utility. It is not impossible for an investor-owned utility to switch gears and get it right. And her comment about the goals, basically the strategic vision of the company. We will empower our customers to control their energy use, keep costs low, and increase reliability all year long. We will leverage the latest innovations like battery storage. We are working with customers to move away from the antiquated bulk grid to a cleaner and more reliable energy system with power is generated closer to where it's used. If the investor-owned utilities of the country adopt this philosophy generally, we can be partners. Thank you.